Meta has announced major changes to its social media moderation policies, replacing independent fact-checkers with a community notes system and lifting restrictions on certain topics. The tech giant will roll out these changes across its platforms, Facebook, Instagram and Threads. Citing a shifting political and social media landscape, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg says fact-checkers have become too politically biased, and there's been a cultural tipping point towards, again, prioritising free speech.
After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote non-stop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact-checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created.
The changes will also lift content policy restrictions on certain topics, including gender and immigration. Instead, Meta's automated moderation systems will focus on illegal activity and high severity violations, targeting things like terrorism and illegal drugs. The announcement comes at a time when US-based business and industry leaders are currying favour with the incoming Trump administration. Former Republican policy advisor Joel Kaplan was recently appointed as Meta's new chief of global affairs. He says the changes are an opportunity to reset the platform's priorities.
We're eliminating the third-party fact-checking system. Well-intentioned at the outset, but there's just been too much political bias in what they choose to fact-check and how, so we're just scrapping it. And we've got a real opportunity now. We've got a new administration and a new president coming in who are big defenders of free expression.
Speaking from Mar-a-Lago, President-elect Trump praised the move.
Yeah, well, I watched their news conference, and I thought it was a very good news conference. I think they've come a long way. Meta, Facebook, I think they've come a long way. I watched it. The man was very impressive. I watched it.
Meta's shift in policy mirrors changes that Elon Musk made to his social media network X. Musk has today reacted, posting that the Meta changes were cool. Free speech advocate Gillian York says she's optimistic about the changes, but a little cautious.
Got mixed feelings about it. I think that on the one hand, we are going to see a bit more freedom. I've always advocated for more free expression on these platforms because I recognize, the history of them, the fact, the role that they played almost a decade and a half ago in some of the uprisings around the world. But at the same time, I think that we're in a different era now, and people do have expectations around safety on these platforms.
The changes come as the Australian government considers regulatory frameworks for social media to better protect children from harm and crack down on misinformation. Well, let's get more on the consequences of these changes by Meta with a Professor of Political Communication at La Trobe University, Andrea Carsten, who joins us now. Morning, Andrea. So now, instead of paying third-party groups, including news organisations, to produce fact checks on misinformation, Meta's going to rely on its community of users to add notes. Can you maybe first just explain how that model would work in practice?
Yes, sure, Casey. This is adopting the method that X, or formerly Twitter, uses, where its own user base adds comments to things that it think might be false claims and calls things out. Now, the problem with that is that it's very hard for other users to determine the accuracy or the credibility that individual users bring into calling out those claims. And that system's called Community Notes.
That Community Notes system, I've seen some people describe it as actually a fairly successful system. It's a system that Mark Zuckerberg has cited and sort of praised in his announcement today. On the whole, is this set of changes a good or a bad thing to you?
Well, I was pretty shocked when I woke up to this news this morning, and fact checkers around the world see it as a real blow when feel ambushed by this decision. They didn't see it coming. Third-party fact checkers, which Meta employs across its networks, and keeping in mind that Meta has 3.7 billion users, Their job is to adhere to the principles of the International Fact-Checking Network, which is to be non-partisan, to be free of bias, and they only fact-check claims that can be verified and measurable. And there's a lot of work. It's a very high bar in order to be admitted to that international organisation to get third-party fact-checking status, and much work goes into looking at those claims and being able to debunk them. We need to keep in mind that the World Economic Forum in 2024 declared mis and disinformation as the single most greatest threat to the globe for that year, and third-party fact-checking was one important way of dealing with that global threat.
How much of an impact did that fact-checking, third-party fact-checking program have in actually combating misinformation on the platform? Will its absence be noticed?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, lots of studies have been done on this, including studies that I've done with colleagues. Third-party fact-checking is not perfect, but it's an important tool in the arsenal of tools that are available to deal with mis and disinformation that flows freely across social media networks. It will be sorely missed because it also subsidises journalism. In many countries across the globe, it's newsrooms that undertake this third-party fact-checking work, and that revenue that they get from doing that work subsidises really important journalism. In Australia, that's also true. So if this decision flows beyond the US, which it's likely that it will have implications for news outlets in Australia as well, including the very esteemed wire service, AAP.
Andrea, the company is also saying it's going to start recommending more political content on its platforms. It's going to prioritise free speech. It's sort of hard to not see some of this language today as a repositioning of the company ahead of the second Trump presidency, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the motivation for this is political. We've seen changes to the Meta board in the last week, with Trump supporters being elevated, Joel Kaplan going to the top position on the Meta board, and as we saw in the previous clip, Donald Trump complimenting Meta, saying they've come a long way. So there's political motivation, it would appear, that is motivating these changes, and seeing more political content. One might want to look at the example of X, which has taken a real turn to right-wing commentary since Elon Musk took it over. But it also has lost many users since that turn. So there could be some solitary lessons here for Meta if it is going to take this turn as to what happens to its user base.
But it's also consistent with, I guess, a bit of a shift in the technology industry. Mark Zuckerberg is far from the only tech CEO who had a somewhat strained relationship with Donald Trump in previous years, but it looks like the entire industry is attempting to do some sort of political reset here. What could be the consequences of that?
Well, it shows greater division between the US and Europe in the way that mis and disinformation is being managed. Europe has legislated with the Digital Services Act and has taken regulation very seriously about making platforms accountable for mis and disinformation on their platforms. They need to do regular reporting and they need to demonstrate how they're tackling this problem. The US is going off in a very different direction now as we see Donald Trump about to be inaugurated back into the presidency.